Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Public Policy Podcast, where we dissect public policies to uncover what works, what doesn't, and why. I'm your host, Adnan, and today we will go to Mexico City in Mexico and see how local leadership can drive a significant change to tackle development challenges. So, in 2002, you're in Mexico, you're a young person, and you learned some skills, you're looking for jobs. There are jobs available, but it's confusing because everybody's asking for a certificate of professional aptitude or a fancy diploma. So in the early 2000s, Mexico's got a big economy, so the 11th largest in the world, I believe, with all these free trade agreements. You got the NAFTA, you got the European Free Trade Agreement, and of course, individual free trade agreements with countries across the Atlantic and, of course, across the Pacific. But the kicker is basically the workforce in Mexico at the time is mostly low skilled. It's like you've got the engine, but you're running on half a cylinder. So the experts back then, they didn't sugarcoat it. They called the system uncoordinated and disconnected from what the market reality actually needed. So what did Mexico do? Something very brilliant. It looked very interesting. So they looked at the UK and especially this thing called the National Vocational Qualifications Framework. The idea was to certify skills and make them measurable, observable, and giving people a way to prove what they can do. It sounds good on paper, but here's where it gets tricky. They set up this public trust called Conocer, with big political backing, and the goal was to help the 32 million Mexicanos without formal secondary education to get credit for the skills they'd picked up on the job. But of course, this thing didn't fly. Out of 45 million workers, only 250,000 ever got certified. That's crazy. That's like 0.5%. So what did they like? Yeah, why didn't it work? Well, the system was super top down. They basically imported the UK model, added some Spanish to it, and hoped for the best, but didn't really get buy-in from the people who would actually use it. So businesses, unions, schools, and even the workers themselves saw it as a waste of time and effort. Plus, once the political winds shifted, the support just evaporated. There were even accusations of corruption and mismanagement. So by 2004, the whole thing was basically dead. And but it's funny when I graduated, I remember applying for jobs where the requirements were all over the place. One place wanted a fancy diploma, another wanted an actual degree from a university, and some others just wanted to see if you could actually do the work. So it is very confusing, and especially for like technical jobs. And I think a lot of people in Mexico felt the same way. And I think also it's more of an international thing. So that's what makes sense and makes these big national reforms so hard, because you know the problem, you can easily identify the problem, but what about the solution? So you can have the best technical system, theoretically, but if people don't use it, it doesn't really fit their reality and it just dies. So fast forward 07, this guy steps in, Sergio Garcia Bule, and he's got a private sector background. So he didn't step in, he was called in by his friend at the time. She was the Minister of Education, I believe. And he's basically handed the keys to this broken down system. And instead of just tweaking things, he goes all in, revamps the whole thing. So he spent 6 months talking to everyone, businesses, unions, workers, academics, all the stakeholders. And what he figures out is that the system wasn't useful for the users it's intended to help. So he flips the whole thing down. Instead of a top down, government knows best approach, one thing fits all, he brings in industry and unions to actually set the skill standards themselves. They decide what needs certifying, what doesn't need certifying, and how to evaluate it and how to sustain it. So suddenly it became bottom up, and then he tackles the cost problem. Before, only these third-party certifiers could do the job, and they charged a lot. So like 2,500 pesos, 7,500 pesos per worker, depending on where you are, depending on what kind of job, depending on how desperate you are, like all of that. So imagine if you're an agriculture worker, it's going to be very hard even just to go to the places to get certified. So that's a lot. And especially for someone just trying to, get ahead with no real higher education or like master's degree stuff. So this guy, Garcia Bulle, lets universities, vocational schools, employers, and even unions become certifiers. So now internationally, people worry about conflicts of interest, but his argument was in Mexico, the reputation of these institutions mattered more than some distant third party. And it worked. One union started charging only 1,500 pesos for 3 levels of certification. That is a big difference and a big cost saving. And also it made the thing very valuable because it is measurable, transparent, and useful. The other big change was that he stopped subsidizing the committees that set the standards. So the thought behind it was that if industries and companies really cared about these standards, they'd invest their own time and money. No more passive participation just because there's government money on the table, or like the government will pay for it, so we're just gonna do the photo ops and then not hire anyone or like not even participate. So it made it more of a risky move for the government, especially for Bulle, and it forced real buy-in from the different stakeholders. After that, he opened the system up to all kinds of sectors, not just manufacturing or tourism, which is what Mexico is based about, or like the Mexican economy is about, but also the emergency responders, people working with indigenous languages, even skills for deaf and blind workers. It was very inclusive and innovative in that regard. Remember, this is 2007 or like 2010. But maybe the most controversial move was allowing competing standards within the same sector. Like, for example, hotels in Cancun could have different standards than hotels in Mexico City or Monterrey. And it makes total sense to have it that way. So normally you want one universal standard, like in many places around the world. But Mexico is so diverse. It is a big country, and it's got a lot of people and a lot of different types of businesses, especially in the service industry. So Garcia Bulle argued that flexibility was more important than universality, which is something to take as lessons learned for future policymakers. So it didn't make sense at the time to do this, but it does now. I mean, a 5-star resort in Cancun by the beach isn't the same as a business hotel in the capital. And of course, both are not the same as a 5-star Castellino on a farm in the north. So this approach lets employers and workers define what mattered for their own context. Of course, this wasn't popular with everyone. There's the people who did not like how the situation is moving. So the old certifiers, for example, lost their monopoly and a lot of money along the way. So there were lawsuits, there were even personal harassment. It gets a little bit nasty in that regard. But the good thing here was the strong political backing and support from big employers and unions. So the whole thing pushed through and survived. So the question is, did it work? And I say, absolutely. I was in Mexico. I was in Cancun. I was in Mexico City. I have a lot of Mexican friends, and everybody says that, first of all, they did not know that the program existed, or the Conocer as a public trust fund existed. But those who knew, they already know someone in their community who benefited from it. So that's great. So in a lot of ways, it was successful, from the case study we're studying today. And by 2013, there were 134 new committees, over 300 new skill standards, and more than 300,000 certifications issued in just 5 years. So that's double what the old system did in 12 years. So that's crazy. So the number of certifiers exploded as well. Now there's more than 170 across the country, not just in Mexico City, which is great. So that means there's more localization efforts, there's more community adaptation efforts as well. And of course, user satisfaction skyrocketed, as some unions even reported productivity gains that led to real bonuses for workers who are already employed, or in addition to the ones who got jobs because of the certification. So that's not just theory, that's money in people's pockets, that's money in families and households, and that contributed to the economy as a whole. The big but here was that the system was still young. I mean, you can't, like, with public policy, you gotta weight it, you gotta feed it, you gotta, sustain it for at least 10 years to see real tangible impact. So there were real concerns for sustainability. Some experts worried that the committees were popping up too fast, maybe without enough oversight. And as a government institution, Conocer would never have the necessary tools and resources to do oversight for everybody at the same time and all the time. There were questions about quality control, were the evaluation requirements strong enough, and the system's mandate had gotten pretty broad, maybe too broad, because also there's a lot of skills to be certified, so you need a lot of committees, and you need a lot of research and stakeholders to join in. But the biggest issue was also legal fragility. Conocer was set up as a public trust by administrative decree, not by organic law. That meant if a new government comes in, they could just pull the plug and the whole thing ceases from existence. So labor leaders and business groups wanted it anchored in legislation for stability. And this is like, the demand is coming from people who need the talent. So that's a big win here. That means, like, the users themselves, like, you got a system, two types of users: the talents who are looking for jobs, or who are trying to get employed or being employed and trying to improve. And you got the people who own businesses, and they need to hire talent to keep their businesses running. So both basically want this system to continue. And of course, this legal, let's say, stability is very important, and let's say legal certainty is everything in terms of public policy and the longevity and sustainability of the impact. So if people think a program could disappear overnight because of a political shift, they're less likely to invest in it, even with all the growth. So by 2013, only about 30% of industrial chamber members and members of chambers of commerce even knew about Conocer. So its impact was still limited by lack of awareness and not enough of people knowing it existed. Despite all that, Garcia Bolle was proud, and some hoped the model could be exported. But others, like the founding director of Conocer, felt Mexico had lost its early lead. So it's a mixed picture. The big lesson here, I think, is that even the best designed reforms need constant adaptation, real buy-in, and inclusivity and involvement and engagement, and a solid legal foundation that to lead to the legal stability. And those tensions, top down versus bottom up, national standards versus local flexibility, public versus private investment, they never really go away. It's a constant struggle, and that's what make public policy a very interesting subject to me. Mexico's story just make them super vivid. It's a very diverse country, as we said, and it's very interesting in general. So today, August 25, Conocer is still running and growing. They have a nice and easy website. It includes a database of people who are certified for one or many competencies, and of course, a list of service providers, and a very clear transparency and access to information mechanism and guidelines. So that is very, new and very interesting and very open. So that meant less room for corruption or mismanagement. All right, so that's our look at Mexico's skills revolution. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's also kind of very inspiring. Thank you for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can also join our newsletter for additional resources, updates, and exclusive content. Until next time, stay informed, stay inspired, and keep exploring. This episode was produced at L Station with help from Nicholas Stuva. L Station is a partnership between L Space Social Innovation Hub and XI Talents.